It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Before we get into the show, I want to let you know about something I feel will be a game changer for aspiring tiny houses and the tiny community as a whole. It's a 3D tiny house designer that my friends at TinyEasy have recently released. And since you're listening to this podcast to learn more about tiny living, you've probably been envisioning and dreaming about what your own tiny house could look like. Well, TinyEasy's 3D Tiny House Designer is the first online design tool that lets you design your tiny house without needing any technical or design knowledge. I know for someone like me whose creative strengths are definitely not in design, that this is a time and frustration saver. I love that in the designer, I can just drag and drop building blocks to design my tiny house in minutes and then share the design with my friends and tiny house builders. How cool is that? But what's the alternative? Well, I'd literally be sitting here for weeks or maybe even months trying to learn a difficult professional drafting program, or I'd have to hire an expensive architect. All the technical stuff kind of hurts my brain. Can you relate? And I'd rather the money go towards some must-have features in my tiny house. The best thing about the designer is that you can try it out for free and start mocking up your tiny house today. Just choose one of their beautiful tiny house design templates or start from scratch and let your creativity and imagination run free. Now, if you like the 3D Tiny House Designer, the TinyEasy team are giving you a super generous 75% off the first month of the premium version, and that includes a ton of more awesome objects, furniture, decorations, materials, and so much more to make your tiny house super special. So just head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/TinyEasyDesigner and use the code Lucy75 to get started. I'll also put a link in the show notes with all the details for you for easy access. And if you haven't heard my tiny house conversation with the TinyEasy team, make sure you go check out episode number 22 with Till, Lauren, and Eugene. They're doing some amazing things over in New Zealand to help make your tiny house journey easier, and this 3D designer is just the start. Now, let's intro today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of Tiny House Conversations. Today I'm speaking with Mel Sparkles, who is a tiny houser from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. With a lifelong passion dedicated to tiny spaces and traditionally being a graphic designer, Mel went on to study building design, interior design, and construction. After helping with other tiny house builds, Mel started building her own tiny house in 2020, which she has recently moved into. Mel hosts the Facebook groups Tiny Houses Brisbane and Queensland and Land and Tiny Houses to Rent or Buy in Australia. Mel has worked as a volunteer for the Australian Tiny House Association for the last 4 years and has hosted regular tiny house meetings to bring tiny house folk together. Mel has engaged in media spots and participated on speaker panels for tiny houses. She is currently designing another tiny house to build on land that she recently purchased and is navigating the waters with council. And in this conversation, we talk about Mel's story of living in a caravan to building her own tiny house in her 50s and buying her own land, the struggles Mel experienced during the DIY building process, how Mel created the tiny house life she wants to live. We also talked about what tiny living has enabled Mel to do in her life that she couldn't do before, as well as frustrations around council regulations and solutions for the housing crisis, and so much more. This was a really lovely conversation, and I feel like Mel has an inspiring story, which you'll get to hear very shortly. So, on to this tiny house conversation with Mel. Mel, thanks for joining me on Tiny House Conversations. It's so good to have you here today.
Thanks, Lucy. I'm happy to be here.
So, Mel, you have an interesting story. You've studied interior design and building design and construction. And I know that you've also had plenty of experience living in smaller spaces. So you've previously lived in a caravan and now you're living in a tiny house that you actually built yourself quite recently. And I know you're also you just recently bought some land to park it on. But not only that, I know you're also very involved in the tiny house space in Australia. So you're advocating through the Australian Tiny House Association, you do speaking, you do gatherings, and so many other things. So I'd love to hear about like all of those types of things today. But if we can start first by just taking us back to where your tiny house story started and maybe what inspired you to transition into small space living and then build your own tiny home yourself.
I guess that it was just kind of a natural progression. I'd always loved small spaces. I was living in traditional housing, and I was probably using about half of the space that I lived in, and then downstairs I was renting that out. So I was probably actually using a quarter of the space all up. So it just didn't make sense to live like that anymore. So after a little while I moved into the caravan, which was not really the plan, but it kind of just seemed like a good solution at the time. It was affordable. I bought it with a tax return, so it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. And after a few years, I was able to buy a trailer to build a tiny house on wheels and, just started building. So I've been building it it's been a couple of years and I've just moved in. So it's kind of early days for me living in a tiny house, but I'm well and truly used to small spaces.
Yeah, and it sounds like I guess the caravan could have been like a stepping stone for you, right, into a tiny house.
Oh, definitely. And it was a really good solution. Like, I wouldn't kind of go recommending to people to go and, take the leap into a caravan because it's pretty radical. It's a bit of a shock to the system. It definitely served its purpose, and it definitely was only a stepping stone for me. It was never something that I never actually thought I'd live in a caravan. I never wanted to, but it worked out really well, and it was a really great caravan, and I've lived on beautiful properties. So, I've been quite lucky in that respect.
And you just mentioned there, so being in a caravan was a bit of a shock to the system. So what do you mean by that? Like, what were some of the experiences that you had that made it like that?
Initially, I didn't have a bathroom, so not having a proper bathroom in close proximity is pretty tricky to navigate. So I ended up building, putting a shower and a toilet in the caravan, and then it was a lot more comfortable for me. Once I got water plumbed in, things were a lot better, but at first it really was just extreme glamping. Those kind of adjustments. Winter was really cold, even though the caravan was insulated. So it's just an adjustment, but and also the stigma of living in a caravan was pretty hard to deal with when I'd come from like a nice area and lived quite well and went to private school and all that sort of stuff. So it was a bit of a vast shift for me, but I knew that I've had my eye on the prize the whole time.
It's interesting you say that. Yeah, there is this perception. There does seem to be this perception around people living in caravans. And I feel like the reality is, I know you can't really judge a book by its cover. Like, some people they're doing it out of necessity and others choose to live that way. And like you said as well before, like you only used a quarter of the space you were living in when you were living in a traditional home. And so for some people it does make sense, and it doesn't, define them as the types of people they are. But I've definitely heard that whole perception and that trailer park type thing. But yeah, hopefully that changes over the years, especially with all the housing stuff that's happening at the moment, where I'd be willing to bet that so many people would absolutely love to have a caravan or something like that, where they can live with either themselves or their family or partner or something that are kind of struggling with the housing crisis.
Yeah, look, it's a really freeing solution. A freeing situation from traditional housing. If you want to make the leap, it's a great way to do it. Or not a great way, it's a good way to do it. Like, it's affordable and quickly. You can do it quite quickly, so it's a good temporary situation. I mean, some people build decks and, awnings and all that sort of stuff and can make it permanent. And that's great. But I didn't. That was not my plan. So building the tiny house, when I'm in the tiny house, I just feel so much more in alignment with what I'd intended. And the tiny house is, the reason I've done that is so that I can put it on land I'll probably build a shed on the land. I bought a little piece of land. I'll build a shed on the land, and then I can go away. I'm free. I can put all my stuff in the shed. Like, I don't have a lot anymore, but I can leave my stuff in the shed. I can get in my camper van and I can go and do the travel that I've wanted my whole life, So it's all kind of part of the big picture for me.
I know for a lot of people that are just discovering tiny houses now, or maybe they've kind of heard of it, but they don't really know much about it. And there is more awareness around it now. And one of the common questions that I've heard several times is, what is the difference between a caravan and a tiny house on wheels? So from your experience and what what would you say about that?
A tiny house on wheels comes under VSB1 standards, which is the caravan standards. So technically a tiny house on wheels is deemed a caravan according to Department of Main Roads. In those respects, it is a caravan, but obviously it's not, because it's built differently from a caravan. It's built more like a house. So it's kind of a combo. It's a confused caravan.
I love that. That's a great description.
So, yeah. But, it definitely feels better to have that structure around me, the solidity of it compared to a caravan, because the caravan used to get some pretty nasty shakedowns when the wind came through.
Yeah. So it is like more structurally sound to have a tiny house. And then obviously caravans are often designed to be more movable more often, whereas a tiny house, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. I mean, it depends on the context, of course, and the size and all of that. But yeah. I know that, I mentioned just before, you've done studies in building design, interior design and construction. Are you able to share a bit about that, like your experience in those for us? What was that like?
I'm a builder. Like, since I was a child, I've been building things, and I'd always wanted to be a carpenter, and I kind of left going to TAFE till way too late. I was about 50 when I went and did a Cert 1 in construction, because I wanted to do woodworking, and I couldn't find anyone to teach me woodworking, the actual craft. So, yeah, I went to TAFE, and TAFE were like, you've got to get an apprenticeship. And I was 50 at the time, and I was too embarrassed to apply for an apprenticeship. So I just went and did the Cert 1 in construction, and I totally lucked in. Like, while I was there, our project was a tiny house. So it was, the gods, the universe aligned. So I helped build this tiny house, and we did it from the ground up. It was pretty full on. Then after that, I went and studied building design, because I couldn't get into the woodworking side of things. So I thought I'll go in from, the design side, and then find a carpenter to work with me to build tiny houses. When I finished that course, I didn't actually complete it. I got about 3/4 of the way through, and I just couldn't get through the end. It was really hard. And I decided to just do it. Like, I was so sick of all these hard yards to get where I wanted to be. So I just started building it. I just thought, I'll just do it. And so the caravan was kind of my trial project at building. So I rebuilt the whole thing except for the skin, learnt a lot. And so in my tiny house, it's definitely not perfect, but I'm pretty happy with what I've achieved. And I think from doing the caravan and a few other projects I've done, I've got to this point of being able to do a fairly decent build. So, but, I just found out the other day, a friend of mine who's 76 got an electrical apprenticeship.
Oh.
I'm like, wow, I wish he had pushed me, because I would have loved to have been a carpenter, and it's not over yet, you never know. Anything's possible.
Yeah, it's never too late. And I feel like I constantly hear about people, following their dreams in their later years. And yeah, I think that's really inspiring. And
Yes.
And even the fact that you just decided anyway, like, it's inspiring in itself that you just decided, you know what, I'm just going to do it, because it's not an easy process, and it's a really big project. So, and with a lot of different parts, and a lot of layers to it, and just wanted to commend you on that, because even just that decision of just choosing to do it and then getting on with it and doing it and now being able to live in it. That's really cool. And I'm curious about the building process that you've gone through with your tiny house. So what were some of your biggest challenges during that process?
Oh, there's been a few. It's kind of, you just have to, I think, like if I was to offer anyone a tip, the most important thing would be to do whatever's in front of you. Like if you try to do the whole thing, you'll just cave in with anxiety. I've got a work in progress board, a blackboard, and I write down all the tiny little tasks that need to be done. So I just chip away at them. And then I've actually found myself going back and redoing things. So some things I've built that I'm not happy about, and so I've rebuilt them. You know, like my kitchen cabinets, I rebuilt them. My bathroom wall, I rebuilt. My bathroom vanity is an old vintage one that I bought. I've rebuilt the back of that so that it fits on the angle of my tiny house about 5 times now. So, and I finished it the other day and I'm so happy. So I think like there's been just so many challenges, you know, like the windows, vintage windows are such a bugger. Like I think if I was ever to do it again, I wouldn't get vintage windows because they leak and they crack.
Right.
I repainted them, I reputtied them, I shaved sides off them. I did everything to make them beautiful, but just they've got a mind of their own. They twist, they don't align with your frame, you know. So I've learned a lot. And my front doors, which are the most awesome things, they're these lead light vintage doors, flung open the other day and like broke. So
Wow.
you just got to let it go. You know, it's like, oh, well, I'll just fix it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good attitude to have for sure. And I can imagine just all those little things would come up and, you know, it really shows your persistence too. Like you're talking about having to do it something 5 times over and then you finally got it done. And I'm also curious, what about like, did you ever have times where you're like, what am I doing? Like, you know, the mental blockages and the mental challenges of like questioning everything and maybe getting in your own way and even thinking like, am I even good enough to do this? Like, am I capable? Did you go through any of that stuff?
I'll cut to the chase with the am I good enough? Like, you know, am I capable? I pretty much went to YouTube if I got super stuck. And if I really, really couldn't do it, I'd spin out for months. And then I would ask someone to help me. They wouldn't turn up and then I'd do it. So it's been like so frustrating but so thoroughly rewarding. So yeah, you know, like there's been a couple of things where I've got a bit of help in. And then I've been kind of embarrassed because I thought, I could have done that. So the doors are going to be tricky for me because I think that they really do need to be I think I need new doors. And I'd probably need them built. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to pan out.
Yeah, and what kinds of things did you get help with then? Like, did you do like what about all the like the electrical and plumbing and all of that kind of stuff?
I had a Sparky come in to do the electrical because that's a given. Plumbing, electrical, gas has to be done professionally. The frame I farmed out. The guys that built the frame for me kindly installed it, which I hadn't expected. So I'm actually really glad they did it because it proved to be pretty tricky. The roof, I had a guy come and do the roof, and I realised after he spent a week doing it that I could have done it in a day. But, you know, live and learn. And after that I kind of had to redo quite a bit, and so that's how I learnt. So going forward, I could easily do a lot more myself. Where I had to farm stuff out, I did, but, you know, I was trying to keep to a budget as well. So, and also I'm really sort of determined to do things myself. So, yeah, a lot of the time I just had to stress out about it for a few nights and months and weeks and whatever, and and just that's why it's taken me so long.
Yeah, I guess it's part of the process though, isn't it? Like, and then you come back to, oh, I could have just done that myself. And then and like you said, for some things you did have to do yourself. So it's like coming back to this realization, this remembering of self-sufficiency and, you know. It's really interesting. And are you completely off the grid, or what kind of setup do you have for all those things?
I've got solar panels and I've got gas hot water system, and like the pump is run by the solar.
Mm.
And then I've got a water tank, so my water comes from rainwater. And then I do have power if I want to connect to it. So at the moment, I've got my fridge connected to 240 volt to mains because it's just stable and reliable. And my solar setup's only really quite basic, so that's something I'd like to soup up and eventually be completely off grid. So yeah, it's not that far or that hard for me to achieve that.
Yeah, and you're doing the composting toilet?
Yeah. I sort of had a fight with myself for many years about buying an acrylic or whatever they are compost toilet for $1,500, and then finally I saw a porcelain one that was $1,400 at the last Tiny House Expo, and just put it on the credit card. I just thought, just do it. I'm really, really happy with it because it feels like a proper toilet. I built my own compost loos for the last 4.5 years. I never had installed a fan, which was such a bad move. So having a real toilet with a fan is just so nice. And, I'm happy I'm not flushing, that water's not getting wasted. So it really is a win-win, a decent compost loo.
And did the ones that you built before, were you doing like the bucket type system, like the human manure sort of thing, or what kind of setup do you have?
Yeah, I had that, and then I bought the kind of urine diverter from the UK. I think it was a couple $100, and that's really worth doing. Separating ones and twos because it's just easier to manage that way, and also not having the compost bins that I've got now with my new toilet. I was having to dispose of the compost every week, so that meant putting it in the bins. Like I was double bagging it, putting it in the bins to go to the tip, so that wasn't good either. I didn't feel good about that. And because I'm not living on my own land at the moment, so I didn't feel good about composting that there. Because I had a situation once before where when I moved, they asked me to dig a huge area with the compost. So I never ever want to subject myself to that again.
Oh, oh no. And the composting toilet that you have now, the one that you got at the Tiny Homes Expo, are you okay to share with like which one it is? Because people are that's one of the most common questions, always asking like which ones, what kind.
Yeah, cool. I bought it from EcoFlow.
Yeah.
EcoFlow? Yeah, I think it's EcoFlow. And it's called the Pasadera. I think the actual pan is the Pasadera. It's porcelain. And then the compost chambers are Nature's Loo.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So that wasn't the right pack. That wasn't the package they had for sale, but I asked for the switch from the toilet they had on display because I didn't like it. If I was going to pay that kind of money, I wanted what I wanted.
Yeah.
So they mixed a kit up for me, and it ended up being the Pasadera, which is kind of egg-shaped, which is really nice. A normal toilet seat, and then the compost chambers, which are Nature's Loo.
Yeah, so then you've got a split system, right? So that the chamber's underneath the floor.
Yeah, it's under the floor, and I was going to get, I think it's called Clivis Multrum, and that's the one where it's got the handle and you can turn the compost, which would have been a good idea, but it was so much more expensive. So I ended up going without the one where you can turn the compost, and it's a bit gross, but I decided to make sure it was all on track the other day, so I removed it and it's all okay, but I just shook it and moved it around to level it all out, and it wasn't nasty or anything. I mean, of course it is, but it wasn't super nasty because it's been aerated for like the last few months. So the fan is just definitely the bee's knees.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like one thing that's definitely essential for having a composting toilet set up is that exhaust fan. Yeah.
And you have to be brave to take on a compost loo. It's a whole different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be doing that for my own tiny home, and I've used different ones over the years at different places, and yeah, it is just a way to, I guess, be involved in the process, of how, and be more responsible with our resources and our own organic matter and all of that too. So yeah, and that's it's always good to get like recommendations too, because I know that everyone has different needs, different situations, different contexts, and some people might do well with a self-contained one, others might need a split system, and then all the different brands. If you're not going to build on your own, it's always good to get other people's experiences. And I'm curious, what size is your tiny house?
It's 6 meters by 2.4.
2.4.
So it's pretty small, but I angled the ends out, and because they're angled out, the loft feels like it's bigger. Like it's there's more volume than 6 by 2.4.
Is the loft the sleeping loft, or are you doing the storage loft and then a ground floor bedroom? Or?
It is a sleeping loft, but I'm kind of thinking that I might have a day bed for the lounge. I haven't finished building the lounge yet, but I want to make it day bed size because, I am used to going up and down the loft now, but I kind of think that I want to use the loft for storage, office, and like a lounge hangout kind of space, because getting up through the night, having a hot chocolate or going to the loo or whatever, going up and down the little ladder's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
So, but, I'm managing okay, but I kind of think it might be better if I was to sleep downstairs, but at the moment it's all okay.
Yeah, good to have options, I suppose.
Ideally, I think my plan is to build a second one, and then I'd have that as the bedroom and wardrobe, where my clothes are stored. So then I'd have the main one as my living space, and then the other one as my sleeping space.
Yeah. And did you build in much creative storage? You know how like in a lot of the tiny houses you see lots of different things that are multi-purpose or different like multifunctional and efficient use. Did you do that for yourself?
No, I kind of under the stairs there's an opportunity to do that, but I haven't really. I put a ladder in, and there's a good sort of space under the stairs, so under the ladder. So that's something I'm still getting my head around about what to do. I've kind of left that. That's a tricky bit. That's a hard bit for me to design, because I've got to design the platform that goes into the loft as well. There's a little drop-down platform. So, yeah, I'm kind of leaving that as a project for later. But I'm building storage under the lounge. But besides that, I don't have a lot of storage in there. So, which is a bit of a bummer, because I do have a lot of shoes. I did do a little drop-down. I did do, as you walk in the door, there are 2 bays that I did that are drop down. So I finished them off yesterday. So that's super exciting. So now because I live on a farm, so all my farm shoes can go in there. And
Nice.
other shoes can go somewhere where they're not going to get farm mud on them.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's good. That's good. And did you create the design and plans and everything for your home yourself, or what was that process like for you?
Yeah. I kind of had about 3 main designs, and the third one. Sorry, I'll dial it back a bit. The caravan that I lived in had the perfect design, so that's what I modelled the tiny house on, and then I kind of just started to massage that into what would work for me with a loft. I ended up designing this super cool little tiny house, and it was square, like the ends were squared off. And once I dropped those down and angled them, it was perfect. So, yeah, it was a bit of mucking around. Now that I'm in it, there are a couple of things I would do differently, like move the doors away from the wall. The front doors, I would leave enough room for a double bed.
Yeah.
So, the width of the bed, I would leave that space to the right of the door or the left of the door or whatever. So that was kind of a bit of a mistake, because that would be ideal to have a bed that goes up and down.
Yeah.
An retractable bed. So that would have been perfect. Everything else is pretty good. Like, there's a few little things that aren't perfect, but yeah, no, I think it's working pretty well.
Did you were talking about the caravan codes before, so how did you find that process of working making sure that you were kind of working with the caravan codes and those types of things as you were building?
Well, with the tiny house, I don't know, really. I just built everything as close to code as I possibly could. Yeah, I guess from building the tiny house in the construction course, I just kind of adapted that with my build and researched everything else I needed to do everything properly.
Are you okay to share like the overall or the running cost of, because you've obviously done a DIY build, which would save you a lot of money out of labor and all of that. Are you okay to share like a range of how much it might have cost you to do your own DIY build?
I really don't know where I'm up to be honest. I kind of stopped counting at about 20 grand because, I mean, I've done it on the cheap and I've waited for materials to come to me rather than buy things that were expensive at the time for convenience and to save time. And because of that, I've saved a lot of money. The vintage windows saved me about 5 grand.
Oh, wow.
So that's a massive saving.
Yeah.
But just choosing a bit better next time would be a good idea, especially with the doors. I mean, that's going to be an expensive thing. So I think I guess 30 grand, 40 grand maybe.
That's great. Even if it's around that or even a bit above, like that's pretty good, you know.
I'd say I'm way below it. It'd be up to 40 grand. I mean, it's worth heaps more with the crafting that I've put into it because I've used some beautiful hardwood timbers. It's definitely a little on the heavy side. She's going to be a bit of a heavy girl. But the plan is to only sort of, move to the land and not be on the road a lot. So.
And what did you do to personalize it? Like, what kind of features were you like, okay, I really have to have this, or this is something, this kind of style, or just any kind of personalization that you did that's really the essence of you, I suppose?
Repurposing things was my main thing. Like the kitchen cupboards were these old vintage kitchen cupboards that I rebuilt. Everything's kind of got that behind it, like the windows and the doors. I carted these amazing windows around with me for like such a long time, probably 10 years, maybe even longer. And they were yellow, like the border, the frame was yellow, and the inside of them is this pink floral glass. Like, it sounds hideous, but oh my God, when the sun comes through those in the morning, it's just spectacular. Like, my loft is like bathed in pink light. And like in that moment, I'm like, oh my God, I've achieved exactly what I wanted. So yeah, there's things like that, that have a lot of meaning to me. I mean, I know it's just a thing, but it's a thing I like.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to have like our comforts and, put a personalized spin on there. And I guess sometimes, I mean, I've spoken about this like a fair bit on the podcast and even just to people offline, is like there is this whole like minimalist thing around tiny house living, but it doesn't always have to be like that for everyone. And it's nice to have your own little features and things that you like or that really speak to you and that mean something. So I love that. And I'm curious as well. So in terms of small space living, is there anything that maybe is not working for you or has been a big challenge? Like, I know you talked about initially when you're in the caravan, it was like those basic things like the toilet and all of that. But is there anything else that comes to mind?
A set of stairs would have been better. And I've got this old like Japanese Tanzu bookshelf that I've reconfigured, and it is a set of stairs, but it's so heavy. So I opted out of that and put the ladder in. And also I had a dog when I was building and she was arthritic. So the stairs were mainly for her to get up and down. She moved on about a year ago, and I just thought it's probably quicker and easier to throw a ladder in. So I'm kind of not really 100% on the ladder, and that could be changed later. I could put the Tanzu stairs in, bookshelf in. So there's that. And then the bed situation, like to have a bed going up and downstairs, raising up would have been, I think, perfect. But, I mean, it is pretty good, like I'm probably about 95% of everything I wanted. Yeah, I've achieved about 95% of what I sort of thought it initially was going to happen. maybe making it a little bit bigger might have been a good solution for storage. But yeah, I don't know. It works pretty well for me.
Yeah, I mean, 95% is great. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really good. Yeah.
yeah. Pretty up
Uh,
the creek. I met someone that was really tall though, because the loft is really short.
Yeah. I guess it's hard to I've talked to people about this before as well as like future proofing a tiny home for things like that, whether it's relationships or family or whatever it might be, or just different life circumstances. It's always interesting because like for my tiny house, it will be ready really soon, and it's also a 6 meter tiny. And I chose that at the end of last year, and then it's been this process of going through and making all these different decisions. And what I found is sometimes I do go, maybe should I have gone like a little bit bigger, and should I have like put more storage here, or should I have done that? And it's always hard for it to be 100%. And then especially when time goes on and maybe you change in some way, or something is just different for you, or you have different needs, it can always change. But I think the good thing about it is, as well, as you can always add things later, or you can do things differently, or like you said, you could maybe build another one if you wanted to do that, if you're that way inclined. And so you'd have, you're talking about like storage and another bedroom and all of that. So I think there's like lots of different things that you can do, even if you don't get it 100%, which I don't think is always going to be super realistic anyway, for it to be 100% all the time. So
Oh, definitely. You can't sort of get something like everything out of one thing. You know, for me, thinking about the next build, like building that bedroom, I think is a good plan for the future. But as I said, I've bought land, so I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing with that, you know, so I don't know if the tiny will actually end up getting there. Like there's so many ifs and buts and possibilities and maybes. So at the moment, the tiny's perfect for me. And I was getting stuck in something the other day about making the tiny perfect, you know, making sure I had this. And then I just went, I'll get over it. Like, just, you know, it's good. Like, it's good how it is. And we get really stuck in that perfectionism of wanting it to be everything, wanting it to be perfect. Yeah, it was a good realization the other day. I was just like, it's bloody good. Like, just move forward.
totally. It's the funny what the mind does. It kind of it's almost, it's never enough, right? And then when you actually take a step back and reflect and see the bigger picture, you're like, it's actually really amazing, like what I have or what I've created or what this is. So yeah, it's a really good reminder. It's hard to, the perfectionism thing is a real thing. And I think that it is a really great lesson on this tiny house journey, whether you're DIY building or you're going through a building company and you're going through that design process and like trying to cover every single little base, and even thinking about, but you know, what is it going to be like in the future? Like, what if I need this, or what if I need this? And it just, yeah, it does get really stressful. So I think it's good for people to know that, you know, you can make things work, and you can adapt, and you can add and take away things later. So that's really good. And I'm also wondering for you, since whether it's living in a caravan or maybe even just living in your tiny house now and going through this journey, what has tiny or small space living enabled you to do in your life that maybe you weren't able to do before?
Well, I'm living on 53 hectares at the moment. My neighbours are cows and sheep and horses, and they're just so beautiful, you know, like I love nature. And when I was living in traditional housing, my neighbours were like heavily into drugs, and there was a lot of crime in the area, and it was just really just dragged me down, you know. So now in the morning I wake up really, really early because I start work early, and I get up and the sun's rising and the horses are just staring at the sun and like looking up and milling around, and it's just like, that's just so worth it, you know, that sort of serenity and peace. So I think that's the upside, is that that's what I've allowed myself to have. I'm still crazy busy though, and that's sort of something I've had my whole life, so I'm trying to learn not to do that. But you know, that's going to just take a bit of time. So
Yeah, definitely. Especially when like if you've been doing for something for such a long time, it does take a while to, realize or just learn how to not take on so much, not say yes to everything, have boundaries, to protect your energy and have space and all of that. So yeah, I think for probably, I dare say most of us, or many of us that are living in this modern Western type lifestyle, that's always a continual lesson again and again, and then you forget and then you have to remember it and learn it again. So yeah. And what about like but on the same wavelength as that, is there anything that you've been able to stop doing in your life since you've transitioned into tiny living?
I went back and studied, so that was the one of the best things. I studied building design and interior design twice,
Oh,
and
wow.
so I had the luxury to do that because I was saving so much money on rent and bills. Because when you live tiny, you generally just pay, rent and bills all in one, in one payment kind of thing. Like you don't have to. Well, I haven't had to do that. I've always just paid, X amount of money, which covers all my bills, like rent and electricity and water. So that freed me up quite a bit, financially. So I was able to go back to study and, just rethink what I wanted to do. And I found for the last few years that I've just been doing what I want to do. And I haven't had to work full time, but I lucked in and found a full-time job about a year ago, and it pays really well. And I've been able to get materials from work, from my build and from my project I'm building on my land. So it's kind of funny. It's funny. I'm kind of in reverse now. Like all of a sudden, I've got a bit of a mortgage. It's not very big, and I'm working full time. Yeah, it's funny. I kind of have a bit of a laugh at my life every so often, but it is by design. Like it's all what I've created. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. So I just never thought I'd see myself going back to full time work, at 58 kind of thing. But here I am, and it's all working. So I really can't complain.
Yeah, and I think that by the sounds of it, you're living this very intentional life and you're living the way that you want to live. You've been able to buy your own land and build your own tiny house. And I think, yeah, and sometimes you just got to do what you got to do for a certain period of time, and that's okay. And yeah, it's really inspiring, and it's lovely to hear just like what I guess moving into a tiny house or just living this lifestyle or living with this type of mindset is able to create space for. Even if your life day to day might be a little bit full, it sounds like you're living in a different way, and a way that's more aligned for you and how you want to live, instead of doing what you've been told you should be doing or achieving some ideal. So that's really inspiring.
Yeah, it's been very liberating, very freeing. But I mean, the caravan cost me $1,200. I didn't have a lot of money, and that's kind of enabled me to like create the tiny house, and all the components of the tiny house I bought when I could afford to do it. So I didn't have a great wad of cash behind me or anything like that. I did do it on a shoestring. Now I'm just kind of topping everything up because I've got a job again. So it's all part of the journey. Like I've just been lucky to have the space and freedom to go back to full-time work. I think before I was too stressed out to work full-time. And now that I've got space, the job came to me and I was able to take it on and do it without any drama. So, yeah, it's kind of funny the way it unfolded.
Life has greater plans. I love it. Never goes according to how not never, but it can often go according to differently to maybe how we expected or how we might have planned. And I'm wondering as well, Mel, so is there a common misconception that you hear about living in a tiny house?
I think on the topic of design, like I know that's not what you're asking me, but when you design your tiny house and when you live in it, it's completely different. Like what you think it's going to feel like and what it does feel like is vastly different. With your design, when you've got your design, imagine you're a little tiny person and you're standing in that design, and walk around your design in your head and just see what that actually feels like. because I was just kind of imagining what I was imagining and what it turned out were very different. Like the feeling of those spaces. Like, for example, I designed my bathroom far too small. So it's about a metre or maybe even 900 wide by 2.25. Big mistake. I've nearly knocked myself out so many times by my cupboard on the wall above the toilet. So that's going. And I just had to cut the vanity in half because it was jutting out, and I bought a big vintage Japanese bath, and getting out of it is almost like really dangerous. so I've had to, you really, really think through the safety aspects of such a small space. Yeah, like, make sure that there's room. And there's new compliance or regulations, rules or whatever coming out with the NCC, with building codes.
Oh, yeah.
So they're suggesting that in front of a toilet that you've got 900 by 1200 space. I don't know if they're going to be able to apply it to a tiny house, but that's what they're recommending. There's a few kind of odd things coming out of that. So if anyone's building at the moment, have a bit of a read up and see how that sits for them.
Yeah, the National Construction Code.
Yeah. Luckily, tiny houses are still under VSB1, which is a caravan standards. So they're not expected to comply with those, but yeah, who knows what the future holds. And it's better to build your house to code as best as possible for the future, if you wanted to put it on land and live on it as your dwelling.
Exactly. And do you, just on that, being like a big advocate of tiny houses yourself and doing work with the Australian Tiny House Association, where are we at, or what's your feeling on the progression of, say, regulations? I mean, I've done a podcast with El Payton a little while ago on the regulations and the situation. I know that things are changing all the time, or at least ATHA is working alongside trying to push for a lot of different things. So what's your feeling on tiny houses and them becoming a bit more, or a bit less of a grey area, let's say?
I'm not feeling that hopeful at the moment, unfortunately, because I just haven't seen any headway. We've done so much work to make tiny houses more palatable to council. I just can't feel anything changing. Like, I haven't seen or felt any changes for years now. And I personally feel very frustrated with it. So I just hope, that council sort of starts to have a look at the situation, because there's 14,000 people on the Sunshine Coast at the moment where I live that are homeless. And they're just normal people. They're just people that couldn't afford their bills because of COVID or whatever, and they've found themselves homeless. So if council allowed people to live in tiny houses or, buses or whatever, and every third person shared their house with someone, the problem would be almost eliminated. Yeah, I'm very frustrated at the moment with the whole thing. Yeah, it'd just be really nice to see one council stand up and say, okay, we're cool with it, let's do it. We'll trial you out for 2 years. And I know, like, it's very important to get your wastewater right with a tiny house or a caravan or a bus or whatever. So I think if that was an easier solution, it would be easier for the council to allow it. So I think that really is a sticky point for the whole situation. If someone out there has got some awesome design and it's affordable, they need to sell it to the council. The compost loo is fantastic. Like, that's a huge relief to the whole scenario for my tiny house setup. But getting a really good grey water and grease trap in for the kitchen waste, that's council approved, that you can buy and put under or next to or in your tiny house, or obviously under it, not in it, would be sort of like so fantastic. And then all they do is they tick it off and they're like, yep, you're cool, like, you're not going to ruin your land, you're using the right device. Yeah, I know that sounds really simple, but that's what I've kind of seen over the years or concluded.
Yeah, well, they want to know that you're managing those things properly and you're not going to, do damage to the land and all of that. So it is fair enough. And I'm just curious on that, like, what have you done for your own situation with? I mean, you said you've got the composting toilet. What about grey water and that kind of setup?
Yeah, I've had my plumbing roughed in and they haven't finished it. I've had a problem finding a plumber who'll sign off. So that's been going on for a few months now. So I'm using it is running off into a reed bed, the wastewater. I'm using all biodegradable products. So at the moment it's okay, but I really I've bought some tanks for grey water and fresh water. So that's about to be set up. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be running it into a grey water tank and then into a reed bed.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And I know that you're so, like, with the advocacy work that you've been doing, I know you've mentioned before that you were part of, like, creating a letter for people to take to councils if they're deciding to go through their local council with their own parking space and their tiny home for long-term purposes. So can you share a bit more about that?
About 4 or 5 years ago, we drafted up a letter. This was through one of the Facebook groups I host, Tiny Houses Brisbane and Queensland. So a few people got together and drafted the letter, and it was to take to your council so that you could have a discussion about where you stood with tiny houses. I didn't get a lot of feedback from it, so I don't know if people were doing it. So we were drumming it up for quite a while, for a couple of years. ATHA, Australian Tiny House Association, redrafted it, and so that is actually available on their website. So I don't know where we are at with that, though. I don't know if that was kind of the solution, because council were kind of not listening. Council are fully aware that there's many, many, many thousands of people that want another solution. Don't really know where that's at now.
It is really frustrating, because just like you said, up where you are, like 14,000 people or something, it's similar down, I don't know the number, but I know down on the south coast of New South Wales where I am, there's a lot of, there's been, homelessness as well. And it's just really sad to see. And no, it is I don't know what it's going to take. And, it's because every council is obviously, or every state and then every council has a different interpretation of legislation, and then they handle and perceive and enforce things differently as well. And some councils are a bit more friendly and then others are completely not. And so it is frustrating, but I'm hoping that as the tiny house movement continues to grow over the years, and it definitely is growing, especially when you go to the tiny homes expos now, like, each time there seems to be a lot more people, and I think the awareness is spreading. So I guess, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think the work that you're doing and, with the Australian Tiny House Association, it's really important, especially during this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been at the tipping point for years now. I mean, I understand why they haven't sort of approved tiny house living legally, because of the wastewater. Like, I'm guessing that that's what the problem is. But, yeah, if they need to jump in and give us a hand, because if they had this solution, or could help us with the solution for the wastewater, then there'd be no problems, really. I mean, people are living alternatively anyway, and they have done for many, many, many decades, So I just think they need to just move forward.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And Mel, so you mentioned just before one of your Facebook groups. Do you want to let everyone know, like, where are the best places they can come and find you? So if you want to share, like, your different Facebook groups, website, social media, or anything like that.
The main page that I've been hosting for about 7 or 8 years is Tiny Houses Brisbane and Queensland. And it is an Australia-wide group. We've got people from all around the world as well, so it's not just specifically Brisbane and Queensland. It kind of started off as that because we were doing meetings regularly in Brisbane. But everyone's welcome to join. The other group I host is Land and Tiny Houses to Rent or Buy in Australia. So that's if you're looking for land, or you've got land to share, or you want to buy a tiny house or rent a tiny house. So that's a free page as well. There's no cost involved in the service, so it's well worthwhile. My personal page for my tiny house build is Slice of Tiny Pie, so it's PAI, which means goodness in Maori. So, yeah, that's about it. I've got a couple of other pages too. I do some tiny house merch, but I'm kind of not really focused on that at the moment.
Gosh, you do so many things. It's so good. Well, I will put a link to all of those contacts in the show notes, and also I'll put a link to, so we were talking before about the council letter that you mentioned. We talked about the National Construction Code, as well as I have the episode with El Payton on the regulations. So I'll put all of those in the show notes as well. Mel, as we start to close out the conversation today, is there anything that you wanted to leave our listeners with, anything at all, whether it's some words of inspiration around tiny house living or anything that you feel called to share?
I can't remember the name of it, the Japanese thing for if you've made a mistake. Yeah, I think it's that, where, human error is fine, basically. So if you stuff something up, it's okay. Move forward. You can fix it later. So that's really important. And I walk around my house and I see my human error everywhere, and I smile. I think, what's that? So that's really good. The other thing is, don't try to do everything at once. Just chip away at it. That's really important. So the work in progress board is really important. When you've got there, when you've achieved it, and you're resting up in your tiny house after you've built it or you've had it built, you'll probably go through a few stages. And I think it's really important to just chill, and allow all those stages. You might not like it, you might think it's not really what you wanted. Just give it a go, give it some time. And it is stressful. The whole process is very stressful to get it built or build it yourself. So it does take time to come down off that to enjoy what you've created.
I like how you talked about allowing and the different stages, especially because I think, and actually everything that you just said there, we can apply that to everything that we do in our lives, right? Not just whether it's tiny house living, it's in our relationships, it's in the decisions that we make, it's in just the everyday that we move through life. It's always great to remember these little things. So I really appreciate you saying all of that. And I just want to say as well, Mel, thank you so much for your time. It's been really great to get to know you a bit more and hear your story. And, I think it's really inspiring how you've kind of gotten to where you are now, and you've just built your own tiny house. And funny that you're already thinking about your next project. But of course, that's always the way, isn't it? And so thank you so much for your time and energy today. And thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. My pleasure. And if you're listening to us at home, make sure you go check out what Mel is doing. So the different Facebook groups and Slice of Tiny Pie, I'll put all the link in the episode show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com. And thank you for your presence and for listening to the show as always. Stay tuned every Thursday for new episodes of Tiny House Conversations. And I'll see you next week. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.